No matter where you are in this garden, you're never far from the sound of water. Starting with a completely blank slate, Craig Luna has created a landscape reminiscent of the North Georgia mountains, complete with ponds and stream beds. The story of the garden and the gardener on A Gardener's Diary.
Craig Luna has been intrigued by water ever since he was a boy. His parents had a cabin in North Georgia where he first discovered native plants. He was constantly in the woods exploring ponds and stream beds. His garden at his home in Riverdale, Georgia is clearly influenced by his childhood experiences in the mountains. Craig, we're here in Riverdale, Georgia, which is really right outside Atlanta.
Right.
Just south of Atlanta.
Right, we're about 15 minutes south of Atlanta, maybe 3 miles south of the Atlanta airport.
But just standing here and looking around, we could almost be in the mountains in North Georgia.
Exactly.
You've got this wall of Leyland cypress, and what inspired you to plant that?
Well, I wanted privacy, and I wanted to bring my garden in closer and make it much cooler, soothing.
And water is a prominent feature throughout your garden.
It is.
Ponds.
Ponds, stream beds.
So really this is a big water garden, and plants are sort of just the icing on the cake.
It is. It is. And there are plants from probably everywhere in the state of Georgia.
This native is one of my favorites, this Lobelia cardinalis, the cardinal flower.
Yes.
I've seen that in swamps blooming, and I've seen it along stream beds, and here you have it right on the edge of this. This is a rather large pond.
It is. This holds about 9,300 gallons of water. Yeah, it's about, I would say, 29 inches deep.
Lobelia cardinalis, the cardinal flower, what an apt name with that, with those brilliant red flowers. And the thing I like about it is that you get this color late in the summer when you're looking for garden color outside of annuals, which provide lots of color. You get this wonderful perennial that I almost forget it's there, and then it surprises me. And you've got the cardinal flower right next to this huge clump or stand of the royal fern, which is really a great architectural accent right here on the edge of the pond.
It is. It is. Would you believe I planted 5 back in the back corner of my garden, and the following year the seedling came up. I had nothing to do.
So you didn't plant this here?
This is a volunteer.
Wow. Well, it is a native plant.
It is.
This is nearly 5 feet tall and 5 feet across.
Exactly.
So for someone looking for a big, bold fern, the royal fern is a good choice.
Oh, definitely.
And you've got a little umbrella of pittosporum, which is almost tropical. So you're really playing with hardy perennials like the lobelia, the royal fern, and then you're adding in these caladiums. So you've got tropicals and hardies together.
Right, and you know, most people ask me about these pittosporums. My brother lives in Florida, and he has a hedge of pittosporum. I love pittosporum because of the thick leaf, the texture, and of course the variegation around the leaf. And I started experimenting with it years back, and it is conducive for our zone. And
it's done okay. It's been winter hardy for you here in Zone 7.
In Zone 7, you're right. And
you've got both the solid green and the variegated.
Right, and they do beautifully. And as you can see, they're about 13 years old, and I have tree formed them. So.
I like them as a tree form. This is a serious pond. This is really a large established pond. Is this the first pond that you put in?
It is. It is. When I bought this house 14 years ago, this was a mud hole. The previous owner had like 14 dogs. And as soon as I walked out the back door, I immediately said, this is where my pond should go. Of course, this tree, this hardwood, was a little bit smaller. And
this oak tree.
This oak tree here. And it just called for water. And what's really unique is I left a huge mound of dirt in the center for an island because I knew that I was going to have marginals in here, and I knew that they needed to be up a little more so than the lilies.
And when you say marginals, for people that aren't familiar with that term, you're talking about plants that you normally find on the edges of streams or ponds, or they take some wet and some dry, but they don't have to have their roots always submerged.
Always submerged, right, right.
And you've got, it looks like iris, and is that arrow?
This is pickerel rush.
Pickerel rush.
We have yellow flag or pseudochorus iris right here. I can put them on the basin of the pond because they're known for
Look
their...
how big that fish is.
That's right. That's Ghost. That's my pet catfish. He's an albino cat.
And he gets along with all the other goldfish?
It's quite compatible. They're goldfish and Japanese koi.
Japanese koi, wow.
Yeah.
This is the first pet catfish I've ever seen. This was the start, this pond.
So this was the beginning. And as a kid, I always played in stream beds. So I wanted something to adjoin the additional basin down here. I opened up right here in between the pittosporums, and of course it meanders its way down and spills into the bottom basin.
And this magnificent cedrus here, cedar, just...
Isn't that beautiful?
It is.
I
that
bought
looks like
them.
the mountains to me.
It does. It brings North Georgia right to you. However, I didn't think they would be conducive here because of the shade, but I planted them early enough, and before everything else started growing and evolving, they really took hold, and they're absolutely beautiful.
An elegant small pond took Craig only 4.5 hours to build, and a night-blooming water lily gets tricked into blooming in the daytime. Stay with us.
The soothing sound of flowing water fills Craig Luna's garden in Riverdale, Georgia. Craig designs and installs water features professionally, but his interest in water gardens began when he was a recreational therapist. He built a small pond as part of a program that included nature walks and botany classes.
And that's just sort of how I got started. This little 2 by 3 foot pond intrigued me so much that I went home and I built my own little water garden.
This little garden pond is more to the scale of what a lot of people probably envision when they think about adding a water garden.
Right. This is perfect scale for this area, as well as very little maintenance. But I treat this as though this is an in-ground aquarium. The filtration system is identical to the small little filter on the back of an aquarium, but on a larger scale. It's a very simple but elegant little water feature.
It is very elegant. How long would it take you, or does it take you, to construct something like this?
This took me approximately 4.5 hours. I sort of knew exactly as to what diameter. This is 3 feet in diameter, and it's about 2.5 feet deep.
Do you keep the pump submerged all winter long?
Not a problem running your pump 24/7.
Okay, so you run the pump all winter long.
Right. Well, as I said, I treat these as in-ground aquariums, so therefore this is to exist during the whole year, you know, throughout the entire season.
And by
changes, and there should be no problems. All of the foliage remains the same in the pond. However, it's just like when we have deciduous, whatever water plants I have in there will lay down on the basin of the pond, and they're almost like a blanket for the fish. Keeps them all nestled and warm and safekeeping.
And the Acorus, I think that's Ogon, that you've got behind the little flute player, really makes a wonderful sort of drapery or something around it.
It does. It's almost like a backstage drop, you know?
Right.
Now, if we have a super hard freeze, they will burn at the tips, but you just cut those out and then
It's a good evergreen.
Yeah, it's perfect.
And the melopodium, that's kind of fun. That is what I call a no-maintenance plant. No maintenance. And you've got the ferns and the hostas.
Well, I have to agree. I've done nothing with it. I put it in the ground, and it just shows its glory. And it's beautiful contrast with the moss and the different
and the deep green.
Different ferns with the dark and lighter textures.
White is one of my favorite colors, so I'm drawn to this white water lily.
This is a night bloomer, and I use a lot of night bloomers in my ponds here because I have so much shade, and they're real conducive for blooming early in the morning from about 6 a.m. to 11 a.m.
Wow.
Then they close up, and as they close, then our Georgia hardy lilies, like this yellow Sundance here, it will open and give you beauty for 3 or 4 hours, and then as it closes, this reopens.
So this is open at night?
It is. It's considered a night bloomer. It's called white night.
Is that a hardy water lily, or is it a tropical?
It is a tropical. I have a couple of tropicals that do come back in our zone, but this unfortunately does not.
So these are in pots?
They are all in pots, yeah.
White night.
Yeah.
Craig's deck gets summer color easily with some creative container plantings. And an unusual variety of Rudbeckia could be called Green-Eyed Susan when we continue.
Even though Craig Luna's property in Riverdale, Georgia is filled with water gardens, his interest in plants isn't limited to the aquatic varieties. He also enjoys experimenting with colorful annuals and foliage plants in containers on his deck. You've got very colorful combinations in your pots, and they really are a good way to bring color into the garden, especially because you've got a bit of a shade garden.
Right. This has become one of my favorite things to do. I've learned that adding color and with herbs that all blend in, even with the stalks of the stems of the coleus.
Right.
So it all comes together, and I love the different textures. This is a Dracaena warnica, I believe. It's just the spike. They sell them everywhere.
Dracaena spikes. Yeah.
Dracaena spikes.
They're fun.
Right. And this has been in this pot now for 2 years.
So you leave the Dracaena and change out the annuals.
The annuals, exactly.
And this is a fun plant. I bet hummingbirds, do they like that too?
They love it. The Penta, and it comes in 3 or 4 different colors. The light pink, the magenta, the hot pink, and
white.
The purple, and the white.
Yep, Pentas, coleus. And this is fun. You talked about herbs. This is parsley that's starting to go to seed.
It has. And the reason I let it do so is because I don't have to replenish it. It will come back next year. It's just great.
This combination is very soothing with the yellow and almost the chartreuse yellow-green and then more yellow. You've got Lysomachia and then the Coreopsis moonbeam.
This is my little yellow garden. I had a pine tree here that was highly diseased. I had it cut off, and I decided to keep the stump. I planted a couple of jasmine. What's really neat is I have a wonderful piece of sculpture in here from a dear friend of mine.
So it's just sort of shrouded?
So it's just shrouded around her sculpture, which is a little girl. So it's sort of like her wig or her hair when she's in bloom.
With all the yellow. Very appropriate to have this.
Just so appropriate.
So the Carolina jessamine, which is another native.
Right.
And it has this beautiful green all season long, and then the yellow blooms. And then the Coreopsis as a perennial in Zone 7. Some people have trouble. What is your trick? Because it's blooming so happily.
Well, I honestly don't know what the trick is, but in the afternoon, this gets full sun. So I'm sure that attributes to it growing so prolifically.
And this is very woodland, having all this moss and the rocks.
I love mosses, and the true key to it is that when you first get the sprigs, if you will place them in good, thick dirt, and then you keep it wet.
That's what it likes, moisture.
It loves moisture, and I'm not speaking of getting the hose and dousing it with water. I'm talking a nice mist. And I find that if you do it for about 5 or 6 weeks, I know that sounds like a hassle, but not for me.
Every day.
Every day,
Gets it
it's
established.
a light mist, it gets it established, and you never have to worry about it. Of course, I feed it along with my flowers, and
It's very happy. All different types.
Yeah.
And then you're not afraid to use bright colors. You've got your soft yellow, but this brilliant, almost purple, but pink phlox. And then your eye jumps over to this Rudbeckia, which I love. This is Autumn Sun, and it's usually blooms a little bit later in the season, more towards autumn.
Now last year it did. This is its second year here, and I'm really amazed. I bought it because of the foliage. I had not a clue as to what the bloom was going to do for me, and it was only about 14 inches high. And I
didn't know it would get this big either.
I had not a clue, but gosh,
and
how
look
beautiful.
at the green. That's what I like, are the green cones.
The cones.
That's unusual because
yeah.
Rudbeckias usually have brown cones in the center, you know, the black-eyed Susans. But you do have this staked up. So it likes to be staked because it's a big plant.
It is. So I had these little dowel rods and just add a little art in with the foliage and the beautiful bloom. It worked well.
Craig has created a small water garden complete with aquatic plants and a fountain, perfect for apartment dwellers with limited space. Stay with us.
Craig Luna's garden in Riverdale, Georgia, has large ponds filled with water-loving plants. But even with limited space, it's still possible to have a water garden. This is a great water garden, and it's just all self-contained in this big bowl.
Right. I have a lot of fun with these. Number one, I put a pump in here because it gives you great sound. Right here we have dwarf umbrella palm, Cyperus artifolius. I've got the variegated sweet flag.
That's pretty.
These are beautiful swords.
Even without flowers, you've got all this color.
I was going to say, these do not really produce any significant bloom, but I love the texture. I have another favorite of mine, which is a carnivorous pitcher plant, and it does great here and in these little water gardens here. And actually, I leave this in here year-round, and everything comes back.
Wow.
The only thing I do remove, because it is a contained basin, is I remove the pump. For fear that it may freeze over, and I don't want that to be harmed. This is a great plant right here. This is a variegated bulrush.
It's sort of a yellow-green striation right down the middle.
Right down the middle, exactly. And these back here are water hyacinths. As you see, as the season progresses, they start off about this size here. And then as the season progresses, they get larger, and then they just sort of throw off their little baby shoots, and before you know it, your pond or your little water garden is completely full.
So for anybody that wants a water garden, but they don't have a space to garden, but they live in an apartment, all you need is a container and a few aquatic plants.
I get in my backyard, and this is my own little haven, and I cannot wait to get home daily and get back here and just play in the mud, play in the water, play with my fish. There's always something to do here, and it's not considered work. It's my pleasure, and it's my playtime.